U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio insists Washington remains committed to NATO. Rubio's visit to the alliance's headquarters in Brussels is aimed at reassuring members worried that the U.S. could pull troops out of Europe. President Donald Trump has cast doubt on the administration's willingness to come to Europe's aid. Rubio has asked allies now to boost their defense spending to at least 5% of national output. And he says there's no doubt at all about America's commitment.
The United States is in NATO. We are an active, as we speak right now, the United States is as active in NATO as it has ever been. And some of this hysteria and hyperbole that I see in the global media and some domestic media in the United States about NATO is unwarranted. President Trump's made clear he supports NATO. We're going to remain in NATO.
That was U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking at NATO in Brussels earlier. Well, Rubio's comments are likely to have been received with some relief there, but fears that the U.S. will reduce its support for Europe have already sent countries scrambling to rebuild their own military capabilities. Our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra van Namen, reports.
American B-52 bombers on a training mission over European skies. Just one example of the US military's integration within NATO. But with Washington expected to draw down its military presence in Europe, the alliance is facing big choices for the future.
If we look far enough ahead, I think we're looking at a NATO that is simply going to be more European if it's going to survive. More European in terms of capability, more European in terms of even decision-making. That's a real departure from the past, but not unlikely.
During its 76-year history, NATO relied on the US playing a dominant and unifying role. But the Trump administration has repeatedly made it clear it wants Europe to take ownership of conventional security on the continent. But the key question is whether it will be a slow burden shift, or rather, burden dumping.
Some European allies appear to understand that the US may well reduce its role in NATO sooner or later. But they are keen on keeping Washington within the alliance as long as possible. They hope they can increase their contributions accordingly, with the US reducing theirs in a coordinated manner, so there are no gaps in the continent's security.
Europeans are already investing more, with NATO expected to soon announce a new, more ambitious defense pledge. And the EU is promising help and money to produce and acquire more weapon systems. But to replace the US, Europe needs not only more troops, but also more key capabilities, security experts like Anna Wieslander have concluded.
Those are things like strategic airlift, command and control, intelligence, surveillance, some logistics, air-to-air refueling. Those are capabilities that the Americans have, but the Europeans have to a much lesser extent.
Some countries, such as France and the UK, have already shown they are ready to lead the way, whether it comes to Europe's own defense or support for Ukraine. But what Europe needs now is money, time and a new mindset. Former French General Jean-Paul Palamero says.
Europeans must change their way of looking at their security and perhaps their way of life, if they want to do that. It will take some really political strength and conviction to make sure that the public opinions follow that.
Europe no longer trusts Washington's commitment to its security. But for now, it still needs to build up the resources to replace it.
Well, earlier, I had the chance to speak to our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra van Namen, who filed that report. And given the contradictory nature of Washington's messaging regarding NATO, I asked her what member states were making of Marco Rubio's assurances.
Well, I think that the statement by Secretary Marco Rubio here today, those were reassuring words for many, many allies. The fact that he said that the US is still committed to NATO, that they will remain a member of the alliance, that was important, especially after so many different messages coming out of the White House, with the US president questioning the core principle of the alliance and indicating that the US would not protect protect those allies who are not spending enough on defense. Him appearing to be siding with Russia when it comes to the war in Ukraine. So all of that, of course, was feeding fears here in many NATO countries that the US may not be a reliable partner anymore and that they do not value the alliance. So hearing now from Secretary Rubio that the US is still committed was reassuring. However, that is of course what was said here today, and there are doubts what can happen tomorrow, and everyone here fully understands that what matters is what the US president has to say about that and what actions he may take in the future.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and Marco Rubio are pressuring NATO member states to actually spend more on their own defense now. Is 5% of GDP realistic for all member countries?
No, not for all member countries, and it seems indeed like a very overambitious goal. What we have to say is that NATO members are taking aim at a new defense spending goal, probably 3.5%, maybe more. And there are members of the alliance who are already spending more. Poland is spending 5% of its GDP on defense. There are others like the Baltic states that are increasing their spending on defense. But when you look at some members of the alliance, Italy and Spain, they have not been able to reach the initial goal that the alliance has set for itself, the 2% of the GDP, to spend this amount of money on defense. So increasing the defense expenditure to 5% would mean billion of euros, and that seems at the moment quite unrealistic, I have to say. But of course, the negotiations will continue, and maybe the US and Europe could meet in the middle. As I said, at the moment, we're talking here about maybe 3 or 3.5% as a new goal for NATO members on their spending on defense. But we'll see. They're still talking about that.
That's DW's Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra von Namen reporting there from the NATO headquarters. Thanks so much.